You did everything right. You opened the savings account. You set up the automatic transfer. You told yourself this was the year things would be different. Every month, without fail, a piece of your paycheck quietly vanishes into that account. And for a while, watching that number climb feels like something. It feels like progress. It feels like discipline. It feels like finally becoming the kind of person who has their financial life together. You stop buying coffee you don't need, you skip the vacation, you say no to things your friends say yes to without thinking. And every small sacrifice feels like it's adding up to something real, something that will eventually matter. Then one quiet afternoon, you open your banking app, you do the math, and something shifts. $10,000 saved. 3 years of saying no, 3 years of discipline and delayed gratification, and telling yourself it would be worth it. And your bank, in return for holding your money and using it to fund their own investments, handed you back $50. $50, not 50,000, not 500, 50. The price of a dinner you didn't go to, the cost of a night out you skipped, in the name of being responsible. And in that moment, a question begins forming in the back of your mind. A question that once it appears, you cannot make disappear. What if I've been doing this wrong the entire time? Here's the truth that the financial system has very little incentive to tell you clearly. Saving money and building wealth are not the same activity. They are not even close to the same activity. One is about preservation. The other is about expansion. One keeps you from falling. The other actually moves you forward. And the brutal, uncomfortable reality is that most people spend their entire financial lives doing the first one, fully convinced they are doing both. Saving is not a wealth strategy. It never was. It is a survival strategy, and survival, while absolutely necessary, has a ceiling. A ceiling that most people bump their heads against for decades without ever understanding why they can't seem to get ahead, no matter how disciplined they are, no matter how much they sacrifice, no matter how many things they say no to. The numbers, when you actually sit with them, are almost cruel. $10,000 placed in a traditional savings account at 1% annual interest. After 20 years of sitting there, quietly accumulating, that money becomes approximately $12,200. 20 years, $2,200 gained. That is what patience and discipline inside the wrong vehicle actually produces. Now, take that exact same $10,000, same person, same starting point, same 20 years, but this time it's invested in the stock market, earning the historical average return of roughly 10% annually. After those same 20 years, that money doesn't become $12,000. It becomes $67,000. 67,000 versus 12,000. Same money, same time, completely different outcome. Not because one person was smarter, not because one person worked harder, but because one person understood something the other didn't. That money, when placed in the right environment, doesn't just sit there. It works. It compounds. It multiplies itself in ways that feel almost unreal until you actually experience them. And this is where the story gets genuinely dark, because the gap between people who save and people who invest is not really an information gap. It's not that investors have access to secrets the rest of the world doesn't. Almost everyone understands on some level that the stock market grows over time. Almost everyone has heard the word compound interest. Almost everyone knows intellectually that investing is probably something they should be doing. The gap is psychological. And psychology is far harder to fix than ignorance. Saving feels safe for a reason that goes much deeper than logic. When money sits in your savings account, you can see it. Every dollar is exactly where you left it. It doesn't disappear on a random Wednesday afternoon because of something that happened in a market on the other side of the world. It doesn't trigger news alerts. It doesn't test your nerves. It just sits there, stable and predictable. And that stability becomes addictive in a way that's very difficult to describe unless you've felt it. Investing is different. Investing moves. It breathes. It climbs and crashes and climbs again. It forces you to sit with uncertainty. It forces you to watch your money shrink on paper and trust that the long-term trajectory is still pointing upward. And that experience activates something ancient inside the human brain. Something wired for immediate threat. Something that screams, protect what you have. Don't risk it. Pull back. Stay safe. That internal voice has kept more people economically stagnant than any recession, any market crash, any external financial crisis in modern history. Because the greatest financial threat most people face isn't out there in the world. It's inside their own psychology. It's the stories they tell themselves about risk, about safety, about what they can and cannot afford to lose. Understanding this doesn't make the emotion disappear, but it does change your relationship with it. So how do you actually make the transition? Not recklessly. Not by waking up one morning and throwing your savings into something you read about online at 2 in the morning, but deliberately, methodically, but in a sequence that honors both the need for security and the necessity of growth. The foundation comes first, and it is non-negotiable. Before a single dollar moves toward investing, you need 3 to 6 months of living expenses sitting in cash, liquid, accessible, untouched. Not because the advice sounds responsible, not because some financial influencer told you to, but because without that foundation, you will inevitably destroy your own investments. Not because the market will destroy them, because your life will. Because the moment an emergency arrives, and it will arrive, you'll be forced to sell at exactly the wrong moment. You'll be pulling money out during a downturn, locking in losses, and walking away from the recovery that would have made you whole. The emergency fund is not just financial protection, it is emotional protection. It is what separates someone who can hold their positions through turbulence from someone who panics and sells everything the moment things get uncomfortable. It is, in a very real sense, the foundation upon which every other financial decision you will ever make rests. Build it first, build it completely, and then leave it alone. The next shift is mental, and it matters more than most people realize. You have to learn to see your money as having two entirely separate identities. Not in your spreadsheet, not in your financial plan, in your mind, in the way you emotionally relate to different pools of money. One exists to protect you, to cover the unexpected, to give you the psychological freedom to take risks elsewhere. The other exists to grow, to compound, to work on your behalf while you sleep, while you work, while you live your life. These two pools have different jobs, different rules, different time horizons. Mixing them psychologically is how otherwise intelligent people make catastrophic decisions with money that was supposed to be patient. Treating investment money like safety money leads to panic selling. Treating safety money like investment money leads to being exposed when life goes sideways. The mental separation isn't just good financial hygiene. It is the psychological architecture of long-term wealth building. When you finally begin to invest, start smaller than makes sense to you. This isn't false modesty. This is strategy. The goal in the beginning is not returns. The goal is rewiring your nervous system. $50 in the market, $100. Watch it move. Watch it drop 2% and recover. Watch the number change and notice what that does to your body, to your thoughts, to your instincts. You are not just building a portfolio in those early months. You are building a new emotional relationship with uncertainty, and that relationship, once established, becomes one of the most valuable things you own. Because the investor who can stay calm when markets fall is worth infinitely more than the investor who makes brilliant decisions in calm conditions, but panics the moment things get uncomfortable. Now here is where most beginners lose the thread entirely. Complexity is seductive. The financial world is full of instruments and strategies and approaches that sound sophisticated and precise. Day trading, options contracts, sector rotation, leveraged positions, cryptocurrency speculation. There is an entire ecosystem of products designed to make ordinary people feel like they're on the inside of something, like they've cracked a code that most people haven't found yet. Almost all of it underperforms the simplest possible approach over any meaningful stretch of time. Index funds. That's it. That's the strategy that has quietly outperformed the majority of actively managed funds, professional traders, and elaborate financial schemes over the last several decades. These funds don't try to pick winners. They buy everything. Hundreds of companies across dozens of industries, all wrapped into a single, low-cost investment. When one company fails, others carry it. When one sector struggles, another rises. The whole thing moves with the broad trajectory of human economic progress. Slow, steady, unglamorous, and devastatingly effective over time. Warren Buffett, perhaps the single most successful investor in the history of modern capitalism, has said repeatedly and publicly that for most ordinary investors, a low-cost index fund is the single best investment they can make, not as a consolation prize, as a genuine recommendation from someone who has spent his entire life studying markets and still arrives at that conclusion. Consistency is where the real magic lives. And the math here is almost difficult to believe until you run the numbers yourself. $300 a month invested consistently, not $300,000, not $30,000, $300. The price of a gym membership you forgot to cancel, a few meals you didn't cook, a subscription you've been meaning to review, $300 a month, invested at 8% average annual returns, held consistently for 25 years. The result is approximately $285,000. You contributed $90,000 of that. You earned it. You saved it. You transferred it month by month over 2.5 decades. But the other $195,000, you didn't work for that. You didn't sacrifice for that. You didn't stay late at the office for that. Time produced it. Compounding produced it. The mathematical reality that money, placed in the right environment and left alone long enough, generates returns on its own returns, which generate further returns, which continue compounding in a cycle that builds slowly and then, almost without warning, exponentially. The hardest part of this entire journey doesn't happen at the beginning. It happens somewhere in the middle, when the market drops hard and stays down, and the news fills with language designed to produce maximum fear, recession, crash, crisis, collapse. The headlines become a chorus of reasons to get out, to protect yourself, to move back to safety before it gets worse. And this is the exact moment that determines everything. The people who sell in that moment don't just miss the recovery, they crystallize the loss. They turn a temporary decline into a permanent one. They exit the game at the bottom and often re-enter near the top, buying high after selling low, which is precisely the opposite of how wealth is built. The people who stay, who keep their monthly contributions running, who continue buying while prices are depressed, these people are doing something that feels deeply irrational in the moment, but is mathematically precise. They're buying more shares at lower prices. They're positioning themselves for a recovery that, historically, has always come. Not immediately, not predictably, but inevitably. Across every major crash this market has ever experienced, long-term investing requires a kind of psychological endurance that nobody prepares you for. It is not intelligence that separates the investors who build real wealth from the ones who don't. It is the ability to hold a long-term conviction through short-term chaos. To understand deep in your bones that the volatility you are experiencing is not a threat to your plan. It is part of your plan. It is the price you pay for returns that a savings account will never, under any circumstances, produce. That endurance is a skill. It can be developed, but only by going through the discomfort, not around it. So let's land this where it needs to land. Saving is not the enemy. Saving is essential. It is the foundation, the buffer, the thing that gives you the freedom to take the risks that actually matter. Without savings, you are always one emergency away from financial devastation, and no investment strategy in the world can compensate for that kind of fragility. But savings alone is a slow surrender to inflation and time. Every year that money sits in a low-yield account, inflation quietly erodes its purchasing power. The money doesn't disappear, but what it can actually buy shrinks, year by year, silently, until the discipline you're so proud of produces a purchasing power that's less than when you started. Stability is the floor, not the ceiling. Wealth is built above that floor, through consistency and patience, and the willingness to hold positions through discomfort. Through the boring, unglamorous, deeply unsexy act of showing up every month and continuing to invest regardless of what the market is doing, or what the news is saying, or what your emotions are urging you to do. Most people will work for 40 years. They'll earn more than they realize. They'll spend most of it on things they barely remember. They'll save some of it in accounts that quietly lose ground to inflation. And they'll approach the end of their working lives with far less than they expected, wondering somewhere privately what went wrong. Not because they were reckless, not because they didn't work hard, but because no one clearly explained the difference between protecting money and growing it. And because the emotional pull of safety kept them from making the single transition that would have changed everything. You are holding that awareness right now. The seeds exist. The math is real. The path is not complicated even when it's difficult. And the only question that has ever actually mattered is the one you now have to answer for yourself. Are you going to keep storing them in a jar, or are you finally going to plant them?